Welcome to the Growth Zone. I am Christian Bartsch and I have a really interesting session for you today. So today I have with me Sam Schutte. He is the founder and CEO of Unstoppable Software, a custom software development company based in Cincinnati, Ohio, that helps clients build systems to automate workflow and implement digital transformation. With his team of technologists, Sam has led the creation of enterprise-grade software systems for major brands such as ThyssenKrupp, Sunstar, Beech Acres, CBRE, and more. Using this more than 20 years of experience building commercial software applications, Sam knows how to bring difficult projects to success and has been doing so with his company since he founded it in 2008. As CEO, Sam has guided his company's focus on two main client verticals, healthcare and industrial manufacturing, which has led to unique insights on software usability and process improvement for users. He also guided his company's unique approach to agile software development called value-driven development. Using these approaches, it is not uncommon for his clients to see a return of investment upwards of 800% on their custom software investment. We are going to be talking today about the key topic, which is how strategic software investments provide a competitive edge to companies. And I've got for him 4 questions I'd let you know ahead of time what they are. So how can custom software help companies create a competitive edge? Then what are some of the best practices to creating high-performance software development teams? What makes his approach to agile software development so unique? And what is his entrepreneurial story that led him to where he is now? So let's go and get Sam on board now. So I've got here with me now Sam Schutte, and I've got 4 very nice questions that we're going to discuss because our topic today is, as I said before, how strategic software investments provide a competitive edge to companies. And I think Sam can give us a good insight into these specifics. And Sam, can you please tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I basically was a software developer who became an entrepreneur. Through my process of working at different IT departments and then also for startups and such as a software developer, I kind of felt like I could add a lot of value as a consultant and starting a consulting shop instead of being an employee in places. And so, started out my career with my computer science degree and then later got my MBA. And then I kind of straddled that fence and continue to sit in that spot between technology and the business, which has really been kind of the theme of our whole company, helping people find those solutions.
That sounds interesting, definitely. So let's go into the first question that I've got for you so we get a better understanding. How can custom software help companies create a competitive edge at all?
Sure. So maybe the first thing is just to define what we mean by custom software so people can understand. There are, of course, off-the-shelf systems you can buy where it's a product, you're paying a license fee. And what we specialize in is custom software, which is something that is being built from scratch. It can be web application, mobile app, desktop apps, things like that really are your ideas put into software form, right? And sometimes people have similar ideas, so nothing is completely 100% unique, but that's the type of stuff we're talking about. And what we find and what our customers get out of that is, number one, if they're building a system, a custom system from scratch that doesn't have an off-the-shelf counterpart, obviously they want to automate it. They want to automate their process. They don't have any other choice. They need to build it themselves, right? And that's usually something that's really industry specific, really process specific. And the real, of course, the value they get out of that is it, time savings, cost savings, efficiency, productivity, all those sort of things, not losing information, not, getting hit by regulators for errors, stuff like that. So there's all those sort of values. Where it really creates a competitive edge is if you've spent the time to take the ideas that are really core to the DNA of your business, that you say, look, this is why, say, for instance, if we're a HVAC manufacturer, this is what makes us unique as an HVAC manufacturer in the marketplace. You're not going to get that uniqueness by buying off-the-shelf products, because those, when you're designing products, if you're going to put a feature into your product, what do? You say, we need a feature that everyone's going to use, right? We need lowest common denominator. We need to make sure this is a popular feature out there. And so if you're buying off-the-shelf products, you're getting something that anybody can buy. All of your competitors can buy this software. So it's not necessarily special. But if you build something in-house, or build something custom rather, working with us so that it's, completely tailored to exactly your idea or the way you do things, if the way you do things is better and gives you a competitive edge, then that software will automatically also give you that, increased competitive edge. So I think that's the really key thing for folks to understand, is that, it really allows you to capitalize on what makes your company competitive.
Yeah, and I see from your bio that you focused on healthcare and industrial manufacturing. That reminds me actually of a book that I'm currently reading that is called The New Thing from, it's about Jim Carter, with Healthscape, Netscape, and all these other things.
I'm not sure I've seen that one.
Yeah,
I think I've heard that title.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting, because it shows how his career, how he built one business after another and trying to look for the next really good idea that was so unique. So he became actually an idea architect, and the engineers are the ones that are supposed to then practically turn his idea into reality. And that's from what you're telling us, partly what you're doing as well. You're taking the customer's ideas and the information and knowledge and putting it into a software that actually is a software version of what they actually have in mind, and how their thoughts are processing. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of like, what workflow do you run your business with? And, and we target and do a lot of work in healthcare and manufacturing industries, engineering industries, mainly because, number one, those are just in the area we're in. We're located in Cincinnati, Ohio, here in the USA. We have a lot of those types of companies nearby us, sort of being a quasi Rust Belt state. We have a lot of manufacturing. But also, I think those industries, being that they are quote unquote, these are industries that have been around for hundreds of years, right? Healthcare, manufacturing. People have been doing things the same way for a very long time. And so, you can think of these as older established industries where there's a lot of stuff that needs to be improved. And it's still remarkable that when you go to a lot of the healthcare and manufacturing clients we've worked with, they're still walking around with paper on a clipboard. They're still the flow of a job through their building, and even at very large companies, the flow of a job of production, say of like bars of soap or a machine of some kind, is often still on paper, or it's on a mainframe or something not that user friendly. And when your staff is being forced to use some system that is a struggle for them, it just it can just kill their productivity, right? And so, yeah, it's basically, if they say, and we can sit down with pretty much any employee on a shop floor or say like on a hospital ward or something like that and say, how do you think things should be done? And they usually know. They usually have the idea like, well, if I didn't have to hand type all this or hand write all this stuff and I could instead dictate it, or I could, put the 30,000 foot view in and have somebody else fill in the details. If we had software that supported that, I would be a billion times more efficient, right? So we just kind of take those kind of ideas and try to encapsulate them in a system.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you think of it, many of these industries that you are referring to, they have maybe 30, 40 years of time where they usually run their systems, and they don't want to change it just in fear that something will go wrong. So they keep running it, and eventually one day it's so outdated that you really need something that is unique, because of course the business as well, absolutely unique, doesn't easily match to what it is possible today. And that brings me actually to the next idea. That's what are best practices to create a high performance software development team, especially with those things that usually clients bring along.
Yeah. So I think basically when I created Unstoppable Software in 2008, so it's been we're going on our 13th year here, my goal was to create an environment that was as close to ideal as possible for developers to work in. So our development team is all works from home, which of course in this current era of global pandemic is sort of being forced on everyone. But for us, it's just the way things have always been. And then I, provided an environment with them where they would be empowered but accountable, but also feel like they, the things we ask of them are reasonable. And I think the fact that I have a background as a software developer means, I understand what's reasonable to ask of someone or not reasonable, right? A lot of times software developers end up in situations where they have all of the responsibility for a system, but none of the authority, right? They can't make any decisions. They just have to deal with the repercussions of somebody else's decisions. So I've tried to allow them to make decisions more, or at least allow a lot of input from them on those decisions. So I think that helps them feel like they're really part of the team. And I think, the bottom line is any kind of high performance team, the most important thing is that they really believe in the mission. There's been numerous books and studies and stuff out there. There's a book by Daniel Pink recently about motivation and such. And it shows that you can't just necessarily motivate everybody with dollars, for instance. You can't motivate them with threats. I mean, those are ways, but they don't work as well as if they really believe in the mission and helping the project, see success. And so I think that's a key part of it. And then also just making sure that developers have the tools they need, kind of in line with what you talked about, the pace of change and being a little bit slow to change in some businesses. You'd be surprised how many developers at those companies, they're working on systems that, or they're working in development environments, for instance, with, software languages that are 15 years old, haven't been upgraded. Or, we had a customer the other day that, the system was it running, I can't remember, just a very old version of Windows that, it actually was causing problems upgrading and such. And so it's like, developers don't want to work with old tools. They want to learn new things. And so you got to find a way to channel their desire to learn new cool stuff with delivering the business outcome you want of, a valuable system. So those are some of the best practices I try to instill.
Yes, I agree absolutely with that, because I once had a project as well with a business partner who had the office next door. His programmer was programming the phone system for the text messaging on different things that they were doing. He was still using actually Visual Basic 6, and I thought that's crazy. Mm-hmm. I finished using Visual Basic, I think, at version 2012, I think, and I already migrated to C#. And now, for instance, here on my desktop, I've got here Visual Studio 2015, 17, and 19 running. And yeah, of course, you need that sometimes to migrate old tools, and you have new software to update it once plugins are available on all these things. But if you're trying to do something that's, for instance, like for Windows XP and other old systems, it's a challenge because most of the stuff just won't work. And what the client expects just won't even fit. When you think of it, like multi-language and all the other things, and then they install other kind of stuff that then doesn't work. And then they combine it maybe with an iPhone or an Android system that then the platform doesn't really understand. Then you've got a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, that need to stay up to date and to upgrade is something that we help customers try to get their heads around when it comes to building something custom, right? In the same way, if you were to go out and buy an off-the-shelf ERP system, and let's say you pay, $200,000 for it, you're going to need to pay. I mean, number one, most likely that's a $200,000 annual fee anymore. It's going to be subscription, right? I mean, there's any kind of product like that, they're moving to subscription models and such. But in the least case, there's going to be some kind of a maintenance contract that you need to have. So you pay $200,000, and then typically maintenance contracts are anywhere from like 20 to 30% ongoing, and that gets you your bug fixes and your upgrades, your patches and stuff, right? So for $200,000, you're going to pay $60,000 a year, $60,000 a year ongoing. Well, when you're building a custom system, that recurring need for investment doesn't go away, doesn't disappear. If you build a custom system for $200,000 and then roll it out to 100 users or 1,000 users or whatever in your organization, they're always going to have requests for change. They're going to find problems because, for instance, somebody upgraded a new version of Windows and all of a sudden Microsoft changed something and it's broke, right? That maintenance need is still there. But I think a lot of times companies, if they kind of chart their own course and they build something with their own staff, or maybe they have a junior developer or something, they don't think about that ongoing cost. And so the key is if you're building that custom system for $200,000 and you need to spend $60,000 a year, you got to make sure that whatever it's doing is providing that that last 20% of value, right? It's like the 80-20 rule, that you're getting $1 million a year of value out of it. And because if you're getting $1 million a year of value, then you're going to be very happy to pay $60,000 a year for maintenance and upkeep, right? So that's a key part of the equation.
Yeah, that definitely matches, because when you think of it, it's not just the installation or the development. You have to maintain it. You have to maintain as well maybe the hardware. Where if you've got the software running, maybe you might even have to upgrade your clients as well. Mm-hmm. And even if you've got like a intranet solution, you still need maybe to have better technology, new switches and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that brings me actually to my third question. What makes your approach to agile software development so it actually is so unique, as you said before?
Yeah, so, and I guess just a preface on that, I mean, there's a lot of opinions and ideas out there about agile, and I don't claim to be the world's foremost expert on agile. But one thing that all agile coaches will tell you is that every company or every department typically has their own flavor of agile and their own unique sort of way they approach it. There's, even if someone out there tells you that they are following agile to the book, that's sometimes an indicator that they're not even remotely agile. They're doing waterfall and stuff. Now, at its heart, one of the biggest ideas of agile is breaking things down into smaller, iterative loops of improvement, right? So you're breaking things down into week-long sprints, and the idea is you don't sit here and plan out some huge 3-year effort in a waterfall type world so that you're not getting any value, you're not seeing any software, any code or anything written until 3 years from now, right? And so that's kind of just the general, idea of agile. But I think where the way that we do things that sort of works for us and is unique is we try to practice what we call value-driven development, which is certainly a flavor of Agile. But the idea is whatever features that you are working on at a given point in time need to be backed by a definite, defined revenue opportunity or cost reduction opportunity. And for any features that we're mapping out, we ask those questions. How much time is this going to save? How many dollars is this going to save? Right. And anything, because people sort of left to their own devices will come up with a lot of ideas for features that are neat or fun or maybe seem convenient, but maybe they're hardly ever used, or maybe the person that does that job is a very low level or low pay employee that it's like, why spend $20,000 to build a feature for someone who gets paid $1,000 a year to actually do that work, right, as a portion of their job or something. So we try to filter all of our understanding of user stories and requirements through that sort of dollar value lens, is one thing. But then I think the other thing is, one of the challenges that I've seen with Agile is particularly for consultants and even IT departments, one of the challenges that upper management has, and I've seen Agile fail at a lot of very large organizations that had the budget, that were spending millions of dollars on coaching and such. They felt like it was just developers' excuse to just never have a deadline, right? Never have a budget. Just, hey, we're just going to work in 2-week increments and we'll tell you, we're done when we're done, right? And though there are some realities to that, it doesn't really work in the business world. People need to have a budget, right? And I know that certainly folks that are doing Agile right, they are able to do that. But I think what we do when we approach a project, so we do all of our projects flat rate, right? It's a fixed cost. And we say, well, how can we do a fixed cost project which gives the customer what they want, which is a hard budget and a hard timeline, but how can we do that in an agile way? And so we basically do our upfront work and planning of the project so that we are building in a certain amount of sprints and milestones and stuff into that effort, right? And sometimes that can be a little bit variable, but it allows us to, as we go through that project, turn over features and do milestone turnovers, every few weeks, so that they're getting that iterative improvement, but we're still locked into a budget and a timeline, even within that. So it's a little bit of a hybrid, mindset, because it's not just an open-ended, as many sprints as possible type thing, which certainly is not the way everybody does Agile, but I've seen it misconstrued that way. So I think that all feeds into, our ability to give, to prove early on the value we're delivering by showing them working software, and hit a fixed deadline, hit a fixed budget, factors back into the value calculation of, well, what are these features worth? Because if the features are worth $1 million and it costs us $400,000, then it's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah, so that it becomes actually reasonable as well for the IT manager or the project sponsor to actually support your project as well, especially if you need a certain more budget. If you notice, okay, for this and this thing, we maybe need these and these tools or equipment, or we have to do these and these testings because of these maybe new regulations. For instance, now when you look at what COVID has now done, it's influencing as well how people are working and how as well software is being used, hardware being used. So much stuff is now going to the cloud. Mm-hmm. What kind of cloud technology are you using if a customer comes and says, I want to have it in the cloud, but I don't know what to use? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so we've worked on just about all the major cloud platforms, AWS and Azure and Google. We've been doing a lot of work on the DigitalOcean cloud platform, mm-hmm. which is sort of an independent, sort of other option compared to the big three, I guess. But it is especially known for being very developer friendly, and we have found it to just be screaming fast and very easy to set up and configure. compared to AWS, for instance, but screaming fast for stuff like ASP.NET Core. ASP.NET Core, is the most sort of modern iteration of .NET, or I should say .NET Core, really, any kind of .NET Core app. It's the most modern iteration of that, and it's cross-platform, right? So with DigitalOcean, for instance, we have had, we've been able to spin up, for instance, a server that's like $5 a month, and put a web application on there that, it runs so much faster than it would run on Windows, running on Linux. It's shocking, so it's like the fastest Microsoft applications we've written are running on Linux right now, which is an interesting statement, right? So we like DigitalOcean. Now they don't support Windows servers, so that's an issue. When we're doing Windows Server stuff, we typically do try to use Azure. I think Google and AWS are fine too. There gets to be a lot of complexity and configuration there, I feel like sometimes, that it takes a lot of knowledge to know how to do. But yeah, it's kind of some of the platforms we work with. And there's all kinds of other cloud storage and other stuff too out there that we use sometimes.
Great. So that shows us as well that so much available there nowadays when everybody is switching to working from home. So you can't literally have 1,000 VPN connections into your home base, your office or something. It doesn't work. So you really need to move. And and when you think of all these things that are changing, I think as well, I'm sure that through your life story, you've as well been experiencing all sorts of changes, not just of IT and software and programming environments and so on, but what is your entrepreneurial story that actually led you where you are now?
Yeah, so I guess I, like I said, I was working as a software developer for around 10, 12 years or something like that before I started the company. And I think, I grew very frustrated with not being able to make the decisions that I wanted to make. That's one key point, maybe. I always felt like when I was working, within an organization as an employee, that I kind of, I knew, I thought I knew a better way, and I was willing to take the risk that I was wrong, but then you weren't allowed to take that risk. You weren't allowed to make that decision, right? And I would say that, right, wrong, or indifferent, the truth is that probably of the different development teams I worked in during that time of my life, there were probably only one or two that I think were really sound, well put together development shops. The others were a lesson in what not to do, right? And I think that's just about any developer you talk to, or literally all developers will say, yep. That's, they have worked in some places that are just bad. Like just, they don't, all kinds of issues, management issues or lack of tools, like you don't have source control or something crazy, right? And so it just seemed like there were so many artificial breaks that these teams put on themselves that if I created a shop that didn't have those sort of breaks to productivity, we could do a lot better job. Basically for less, kind of more for less. And so I think I had been thinking about this for a while, and I think like a lot of folks, I had I think two companies sort of through that decade, like 2000, 2008 or whatever, that I got involved with sort of as a part-time thing. I started it with some friends and we worked nights and weekends on it type thing. One was like an e-commerce company, another was a GIS mapping company, right? And I was a partner in that. But when you're doing something part-time on the side like that, you don't have any skin in the game. It can die and go away, and it doesn't really hurt you, right? So it was hard to commit. And so when I was working on a contract in 2008, and that contract ended, and I kind of found myself out on the street, an opportunity arose. A friend of mine had become a vice president at a large company, about like an $8 billion company. And he said, hey, could you come in here for 6 months and build some software for us? And I said, sure. And actually that company is ThyssenKrupp, which you're probably familiar with there in Germany.
Yeah.
And they're still my customer today. 13 years later, I had a call with them earlier today even. So still one of our customers. And that relationship has changed over time, obviously over more than a decade. But, that got my foot in the door. And at the time, of course, there was a question of, is this the right time to start a company? Do I really want to do this? Or do I want to find, because again, this was just a 6-month contract, right? Do I want to find a real job, quote unquote, real job? And, I wrestled with it a little bit because my wife was pregnant. My house was on the market. We had one kid who was 2 years old. And then, like I said, she was expecting our second. And then I was also going to night school at the time to get my MBA. So we had a lot going on, and it's like, sure, why not? Let's start a company on top of all that, right? And obviously I'm really glad I did, because that single customer led to more and more and more customers and much bigger opportunities, even within that company. And I think once I did that, there was also a little bit of a journey from being a developer who just wrote code. I was a one-man shop writing code, right? To how do you really become a business owner, an entrepreneur, and a CEO, president type person, right? So probably about halfway through our business life, I stopped writing the code myself. I kind of think of it as I put down that sword, right? And I started just working on business development, marketing, strategy, relationships, and of course on top of everything like bookkeeping and accounting and legal and invoices and everything, right? There was just so much to do. And that's what I've been doing really for probably the last, I bet about 8 years now, 8 years, something like that. I haven't really written the code myself. I've always just sort of been, involved from the product management and architectural management side. That's kind of where I get involved in the tech, really. So yeah, that's kind of that was my journey. That, it was my first business that I ever really was doing full time, right? That really mattered. And that if it failed, I'd have nothing, right? And I think that is key versus something that you're just sort of half invested in because you do it nights and weekends.
Yes, absolutely. Because when you look at things like, for instance, as you mentioned, ThyssenKrupp, which is, of course, a big global player, and they have lots of different business areas that they need, of course, specialized software. It's not something that you usually can buy someone in the shops. And even if like 20 years ago, they might have bought systems like SAP and so on, even that still had to be customized. I know from other companies, for instance, in Germany, where they used to have the migration from R2 to R3 was a 5-year project. And it wasn't just because they knew they're going to migrate eventually to the next version, but it just took so long because they had to customize the software so massively that it was really then usable for this business, because these off-the-shelf systems, either they are not customizable or they are customizable. And if then they're so have to be so much adapted that it really fits, that in the end, when you think of it, you can program a complete new software with it instead of buying somebody else's software and then turning around so much that it isn't even able to update itself, because it's just no longer really the original. And there's so much mess that exists when you then install an update and then it just kills itself.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting because sometimes the question I get from folks around custom software is, well, we're a small business. We would never build anything ourselves. That would be silly, right? And people think it's something that only applies to large companies. But I found that to be very untrue. It just it depends. Some of the reasons can vary about why you would build your own solution, your own system, your own intellectual property. But we've built pretty extensive systems for companies of 1 or 2 people, and usually it could be that the software is the product, right? If you're a 1 or 2 person company trying to get some sort of SaaS product offering off the ground, like let's say you want to make, the next Uber for tracking school buses, or I don't know what it is. There's always an Uber for something, right? So you're making an app, right? So it could be a small startup type situation like that. And sometimes it's not even a startup. It could be a law firm of two lawyers, right? And that's the only people they have, but they want to do They want to build something for their clients to use. And then sometimes you have smaller businesses that what they do in the market they're in is just so unique and interesting and special, or their approach is so revolutionary that there is nothing on the market, because if an SAP type company built it, they would have one customer in the whole world, right? And that would make no sense to do as a product, right? And so we have customers, for instance, we have a customer we've worked with for a couple of years here now that they're very interesting. They design, engineer, and fabricate all kinds of optical lenses, right? And certainly they have competitors, but they are relatively niche, relatively unique in the marketplace. And so the software they needed, it's not something you could buy, right? But they're probably 20 people. They're not huge, right? At bigger companies, sometimes the reason they need to build their own stuff is because the little features and little nice to haves and such that are missing from something off the shelf, say SAP or, pick any system, those little things that are missing that wouldn't really be an issue for a small company, because you say, so what? So we don't track the job ID. Let's say you can't track the job ID in SAP, whatever that means, right? Well, if you're a small business and you do 100 jobs a year, just create an Excel sheet and just track it. You can get work around it, right? But if you make 1 million jobs a year, that's going to be a massive spreadsheet. It becomes a problem because of their scale, right? That they can't just say, we're just going to use Dropbox. We're just going to use DocuSign, whatever it is they want to wedge in. And we've had customers pay us to build completely custom digital signature solutions because the way DocuSign does it doesn't work for them. The attorneys don't like it, something like that. And if you're doing millions of signatures a year, it's worth it, right? The workaround becomes too expensive. So there's a lot of different kind of reasons why they might invest in it, and it's really interesting. I guess I'm kind of a student of the business value and problems and stuff that those particular approaches solve, and certainly I often recommend to people if I'm talking with a prospect or a client, like, look, everything you need, there's no reason to build it. Go buy it off the shelf, right? You're not getting any value by spending the money to do that. So that's part of the exploration process and design and discovery to help them really get what they need.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because we, for instance, have for one of our businesses, we've got as well our own customized ERP system where we have invoices, stock taking, all different stuff, and even the cases that are processed and all the documentation that's being done with these special cases. It's more in the forensics and data processing topics for special cases and so on, like legal cases and other stuff for the police and other things. It's so unique, you just can't buy that. And we have before, like we had a combination just to get the basic documentation, the basic stuff. We needed 2 hours to do the work. And that was like entering everything into the accounting system, entering everything into that system, and writing a Word file, filling out the forms and everything. Then we developed our own tool, and now we do the same thing under 10 minutes. Yep. Which is a huge cost when you think of it every year, what that then usually costs per person who has to just set up the case. It's a lot of time and effort. And now we've got in the same system, I just click into the case document, and we've got everything, all the emails that were sent out, all the notes, the times, all different invoices that were sent out, shipping documents, everything that had to move something, or even sending messages out, or every kind of evidence and other kind of things, everything in the system. And the system we started developing in 2011. Until now, we've kept it up to date, and it's still running today. Although it's a client-server solution, nowadays it could be in a cloud, but it's still absolutely usable, and it's fit because it is a special niche. You just can't get this on a shelf, and it doesn't work. Even if you try to build connections, it wouldn't work. And that's where, as you say, it has to be, in some special cases, has to be a customer solution, whether it's built outside or inside. We have another solution that half of it was built by us and half of it built by an external team. Because we said we haven't got the time to work into that special area. So they developed for us one part of the software, and the other part we then put on top, which is as well an approach, and it makes it still very unique and custom.
Yeah, and I think people. I was going to say the value, part of the value of that custom system too is, because one interesting example people often talk to us about is like document generation, right? So if you look at, we did a project a little while ago for a pretty significant credit card issuing company. And if you look at a small bank that's issuing credit cards, they might think, well, we issue a couple thousand a year. And so, for me to write a denial letter, for instance, is minimal effort. I mean, it takes me 2 minutes to copy and paste their name in, and I send the letter and says you're denied, right? And of course you can say, well, okay, if you're a company doing 5-10 million denials a year, well, that's a scaling thing. And so now you need a system that auto-generates this denial letter and populates the metadata and so on and so forth, right? However, what about if you're in a highly regulated environment like that? If you're a small bank and you're custom handwriting denial letters, you are putting yourself at a lot of risk, right? Because it doesn't matter who you are highly regulated in that way or in that process, right? What you say in your letter, and yes, theoretically, of course, you can just use a template, but did they keep the proper record of it? Did they keep it for, 7 years or whatever the time span is? Did they did they customize or change the words in it? That's all something that could expose a smaller organization to a lot of risk, right? And so some of those, regulated environments, it's kind of like a great equalizer. It doesn't matter how big you are, you need the same thing. FDA audits and stuff like that are the same way. Like you could be a small startup or even, say a small pharmaceutical startup. If you're going to put a drug out to market, it doesn't matter. I mean, there are different levels of regulation you need, but you're still going to have to face a lot of the same hurdles that like GlaxoSmithKline or somebody huge does, right? And you don't have the lobbyists and stuff that they do, right? So I've seen a lot of folks in healthcare will say, well, we have an Excel sheet that we're managing our compliance with, for instance. And it's like, yeah, what are auditors going to think of that? Because they have an expectation, that if you have something out in the market that it's going to be, free of defects, and not, and it doesn't matter if you're a small company or a big company.
Absolutely, especially with Excel, you can't even put a lot of intelligence into it. You can do some macros and so on, and then that's it. A specialized software can store all the data in a database. You can search it. You can maybe add some intelligence into it, like cross-checking if everything is in there or there's some error in the logic of what you've entered, the way you've entered. That you just can't do with customized software. A macro... Just wait for the next Office update and you're screwed. Yeah. Start from scratch.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because what we always find, a lot of very entrepreneurial, creative companies and managers that we work with, they'll often have some, we often find they'll have some new approach or some new code name or something for what this effort is, right? And when we see that, we're like, this is a great opportunity to build software for this, right? So let's say you have a manager that creates, the ABC process, right? Where from now on, we are following the ABC process, and here's the 10 steps to it. And, they design out these business processes, right? When you're trying to be an operations guy and optimize. And they might say, we're going to do this in Excel. We're going to build a quote unquote database in Excel, right? The problem is how do you you have this process, and sometimes you might not even have Excel. It might just be like, look, this is the way that you answer the phone, or this is, any kind of business rules you have. Well, how do you know if anybody's following it, right? And, we've been in environments before where they'll say, this is the way we do things. And then we'll start building the system, and it's like, and then, users will come in and say, oh, well, that's the way we're supposed to do things, but that's not how we actually do it, right? And then, of course, that becomes a decision the business has to make of, well, do you force people to do things the right way, or do you allow exceptions, right? And so my point is that unless that's one of the other benefits of just using any kind of software in general, is it allows you to control that process and see very quickly if people are following the rules. If you, for instance, if you manage a sales team, and let's say you don't have a CRM for some reason, something basic off the shelf like that, do you have any idea how many cold calls they're making a day, how many leads they're talking to? Because you'll ask them and they'll say, yeah, I talked to 20 people, but you don't know. And so you can't control a process unless you can see it. And you can't see a process unless it's in some kind of software. And I think that's across the board true for any kind of business process.
Yeah. So we've got a good insight in what really customized software can offer us as an advantage, especially whether we are a small company or a global player. Customized software when it fits to what we need, and if it's so special in what we need and it is just not coverable or it cannot be satisfied by what a standard off-the-shelf product can do, then that's the best strategy to go for. And yeah, definitely, Sam, it was great to have you here on the show and get a really good insight as well into what's really important in the software environment, in the corporate environment as well, and small and medium-sized businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much too. Well, that's all for today's episode of The Growth Zone. Thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Spotify so you never miss an episode. Plus, if you haven't got your signed copy of the marketing book, stop by on our website at book.prmediareach.com and hurry, because the reserved batch of signed books are almost sold out. So, the address is book.prmediareach.com. I'll repeat, book.prmediareach.com.